The sprawling house in Connecticut was enveloped in the kind of silence Daniel usually cherished when Elena was away on business. A glass of aged scotch in his hand, and the city's distant hum forgotten. Then the phone rang. Not her number, but a direct line from the hotel's security desk in Chicago. The voice on the other end, polite, apologetic, and utterly confused about the guest registration for his wife's suite. He thought it was a simple administrative error until the man mentioned the hallway footage time-stamped at 2:00 a.m., and suddenly, the silence in the house didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like the breathless moment before a car crash. If you find yourself drawn to the moments where a perfect life fractures into a million irreparable pieces, stay with me. The rain in Connecticut had a specific rhythm against the glass of the solarium, a dull, relentless tapping that usually helped Daniel focus. Tonight, however, the house felt too large. The silence, typically a luxury he indulged in whenever Elena was away on her quarterly conferences, felt heavy, pressing against his temples. He sat in the leather wingback chair, a tumbler of single malt resting on the side table, the amber liquid catching the low light of the floor lamp. It was 11:30 p.m. Elena would be asleep in Chicago by now, having sent her customary "Good night, exhausted, love you" text 3 hours ago. They were a couple of habits, he realized, taking a sip of the scotch. Efficient, predictable, safe. The landline on his mahogany desk buzzed, a sound so archaic and rare in the age of cell phones that Daniel stared at it for a moment before rising. Only a few people had this number: alarm companies, political fundraisers, and emergencies. He picked up the receiver. Vance residence. Mr. Vance? This is Thomas Miller, head of security at the Hyatt Regency in Chicago. I apologize for the late hour. The air in the room seemed to thin. Daniel's grip on the phone tightened. Is my wife all right? Is it Elena? Mrs. Vance is fine, sir. Physically, she is fine, Miller said, his voice carrying the practiced, calm cadence of a man used to delivering bad news to wealthy patrons. We're calling because your name is listed as the primary on the Platinum account used for the suite booking, and we have a situation regarding liability for the guest currently in the room. Daniel frowned, his confusion overriding his anxiety. Guest? She's there alone. It's a business trip. There was a pause on the line, a hesitation that lasted 2 seconds too long. I see. Well, sir, we had a minor altercation in the hallway on the 14th floor regarding a noise complaint near the suite. Standard protocol required us to review the corridor footage to assess liability for a damaged fixture. Mr. Miller, I don't care about a fixture. Just put it on the card, Daniel said, impatience bleeding into his tone. He wanted to go back to his scotch. He wanted the hum of the house to return to normal. We can certainly do that, Mr. Vance, Miller continued, his voice dropping an octave, becoming more confidential. However, the footage shows the damage was caused by the gentleman accompanying Mrs. Vance into the suite. Since he is not a registered guest, and given the hour, it was recorded at 2:14 a.m., we need to verify his identity for our incident report before we can close the file. We simply need to know if you authorized an additional occupant. Daniel stood frozen. The rain continued to tap against the glass, but the sound was distant now, muffled by the roaring in his ears. 2:14 a.m.? Daniel repeated, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. Last night? Yes, sir. This morning, technically. Daniel looked at his cell phone on the desk. He scrolled up to Elena's text from the night before. Going to bed early. Headache. Call you in the morning. Sent at 9:30 p.m. Mr. Vance? The security chief prompted. Describe the footage, Daniel said. He didn't ask who it was. He asked what they saw. It was a masochistic impulse, a need to touch the stove to see if it burned. Sir, I'm not sure that's... Describe it, Daniel commanded, his voice cold, stripping away the politeness. If I am to pay for damages caused by a guest I didn't authorize, I want to know exactly what happened in that hallway. Miller sighed. The sound of papers shifting came through the line. The footage shows Mrs. Vance and a male subject exiting the elevator. They stopped outside Suite 1402. There was a conversation. The subject appeared agitated, leaning against the wall sconce. That's the fixture in question. Mrs. Vance. Miller paused, searching for professional terminology. She placed her hands on his face to calm him. They stood there for approximately 3 minutes before entering the room together. The Do Not Disturb light was engaged shortly after. Daniel closed his eyes. He could see it. He could see the way Elena's hands would cup a face, thumbs tracing the cheekbones. It was a gesture of profound intimacy, one she hadn't used on him since their 5th anniversary. Mr. Vance? Should we involve the police regarding the unregistered guest? No, Daniel whispered. He opened his eyes, staring at the reflection of his empty living room in the dark window. It looked like a stage set for a play that had already ended. No police. Put the damage on the card. I'll handle the verification. Very good, sir. Have a good night. The line clicked dead. Daniel slowly lowered the receiver. He looked around the room, the expensive art, the architectural digest layout, the life they had built brick by brick. It was all still there, untouched. But as he looked at the cell phone where her text message glowed, a lie preserved in digital amber, he knew the man standing in this room 5 minutes ago no longer existed. He walked back to his chair and downed the rest of the scotch in one burning gulp. It didn't help. The silence of the house rushed back in. But now, it wasn't peaceful. It was screaming. Morning did not bring clarity. It brought a headache that throbbed behind Daniel's eyes, a rhythmic reminder of the scotch he had consumed in the dark. The Connecticut sun was ruthlessly bright, flooding the kitchen with a cheerful light that felt insulting. The house was exactly as he had left it, pristine, expensive, and silent. But the air inside felt stale, as if the oxygen had been sucked out the moment he hung up the phone with the hotel security chief. Daniel made coffee, the mechanical whir of the grinder the only sound in the vast room. He didn't drink it. Instead, he stood by the granite island, staring at his laptop. He had spent the hours between midnight and dawn in a state of paralysis. But as the sun rose, that paralysis had hardened into a cold, jagged resolve. He needed to see. Imagination was a torture device. He needed facts. He was an architect. He dealt in measurements, in structural integrity, in visible lines. He could not build a reaction on a foundation of whispers. He picked up his phone and dialed the number he had saved from the caller ID the night before. Security, this is Miller. Mr. Miller, it's Daniel Vance. Daniel's voice was steady, stripped of the vulnerability he had shown the previous night. He sounded like the man who managed multi-million-dollar landscape projects, not the husband whose wife was currently in a hotel room with another man. Regarding the incident report and the billing for the damages. Yes, Mr. Vance. I have the paperwork ready to forward to your email. I need the supporting documentation attached, Daniel said, cutting to the chase. Specifically, the visual evidence of the liability. My insurance company is particular about third-party damages. If I am to accept responsibility for a guest I did not authorize, I need a visual confirmation of the individual in question to cross-reference with my own records, for liability purposes. It was a lie, brittle and thin, but delivered with enough authority to make Miller hesitate. Sir, privacy policies usually prevent us from sharing surveillance footage directly. I'm not asking for the video, Daniel countered, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. I'm asking for a still frame that identifies the party responsible for the damage to the property I am paying for. Unless you'd prefer I dispute the charge with American Express and file a police report for fraudulent use of my card. That would require a subpoena for the full tape. The silence on the other end lasted 5 seconds. I can send a screen capture of the incident, solely for identification purposes, Mr. Vance. Thank you. Send it now. Daniel hung up and opened his email client. He sat down, the leather of the stool creaking under his weight. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic, bird-like rhythm that contradicted his calm exterior. Ding! The email appeared. Email. Subject. Incident report. Ref. Warrantino 2. Daniel hovered the cursor over the attachment. This was the event horizon. Once he clicked, there was no going back to the ignorant bliss of yesterday. He clicked. The image filled the screen. It was grainy, the black and white high contrast of a hallway camera, but the figures were unmistakable. Elena was there, wearing the black evening dress he had bought her for her birthday, the one with the back cut low. She was leaning against the corridor wall, her head tilted back slightly, laughing. She looked radiant, even in the low-resolution grit. And then there was the man. Daniel felt the air leave his lungs. He knew him. Julian. Julian Thorne. He was perhaps 32, 10 years younger than Daniel, a rising star in pharmaceutical biotech. They had met once at a holiday mixer 2 years ago. Daniel remembered a firm handshake, a sharp wit, and the way Elena had spoken highly of his fresh perspective. In the photo, Julian wasn't groping her. He wasn't pinning her against the wall in a fit of lust. It was worse. Julian was standing close, his body angled protectively toward her. One of his hands was resting on the wall near her head, but the other, the detail that shattered Daniel, was holding hers. He was clasping her hand in both of his, bringing it up near his chest, looking at her with an expression of absolute, unguarded adoration. It wasn't a stolen moment of drunken indiscretion. It was the body language of two people who knew the map of each other's souls. It was tender. It was soft. It was everything Daniel's marriage had ceased to be. He stared at Julian's thumb, blurred in the image, likely tracing the back of Elena's hand. Daniel looked down at his own hands, resting on the cold granite. They looked old. They looked empty. He didn't scream. He didn't throw the laptop. He simply sat there, absorbing the radioactive truth of the image. The affair wasn't just physical. If it were just sex, he could perhaps rationalize it as a biological itch. But this captured moment of quiet intimacy in a Chicago hallway. This was love, and that was a structural failure he didn't know how to fix. Daniel closed the laptop slowly. He stood up, walked to the sink, and poured the cold coffee down the drain. He had 2 days before she returned. 2 days to build a facade strong enough to hide the wreckage inside him. The headlights swept across the living room wall like searchlights seeking a fugitive. Daniel stood by the window, watching the black sedan pull into the driveway. It was 8 p.m. on Friday, 48 hours after he had stared at the image of his wife holding another man's hand. He had spent those hours practicing his face in the bathroom mirror, smoothing out the lines of betrayal until he looked like the man he was supposed to be. Daniel Vance, successful architect, waiting husband. He heard the heavy thud of the car door, then the click of heels on the stone walkway. He opened the front door before she could slide her key into the lock. "Daniel!" Elena's face lit up. It was a genuine smile, or at least a perfect replica of one. She dropped her carry-on bag and stepped into his embrace. Daniel wrapped his arms around her. His body went through the motions on autopilot, chin resting on her shoulder, hands flat against her back. But his mind was clinically detached. He was measuring the pressure of her hug. Was it looser than usual? Did she pull away a fraction of a second too soon? God, I missed this house, she sighed against his neck, smelling of stale airplane air and a floral perfume he didn't recognize. She usually wore something with notes of amber. This was lighter, sweeter, a daytime scent, or a Julian scent. "Welcome home," Daniel said, his voice sounding hollow in his own ears, though she didn't seem to notice. He pulled back and picked up her suitcase. "How was the flight?" "Delayed on the tarmac for 40 minutes. A nightmare." She kicked off her heels and walked into the kitchen, immediately reaching for a glass of water. And the conference was endless. Just endless panels on regulatory compliance. You would have been bored to tears. Daniel watched her drink, tracking the movement of her throat. "Did you manage to get any downtime? See the city?" Elena lowered the glass, wiping a stray drop from her lip. She didn't look at him. She looked at the refrigerator magnets. "Not really. By the time the dinner's wrapped up, I was dead on my feet. I think I was in bed by 10 every night." Boring, right? The lie was delivered with terrifying ease. Smooth, casual, unbothered. If he hadn't seen the timestamp, 2:14 a.m., he would have believed her. She wasn't just lying to protect herself, she was erasing reality. "I got you something," she said, pivoting the conversation as she reached into her tote bag. She pulled out a small, rectangular box wrapped in silver paper. Daniel took it. It was a tie. Silk, patterned, expensive. The kind of gift you buy at the airport duty-free shop because you need a tangible receipt for your guilt. "It's beautiful, Elle. Thank you." "I saw it and thought of you," she said, smiling again. He wondered if she had bought it before or after she held Julian's hand in the hallway. Did she think of Daniel while she was with him, or only when she was paying for the penance? "I'm going to shower," she announced, grabbing her phone from the counter. It was a swift, fluid motion. In the past, she would have left it there to charge. Now, it was an extension of her hand. "Go ahead. I'll pour us some wine." As she walked up the stairs, Daniel's eyes narrowed. He noticed she had changed her passcode. He watched her punch it in, 6 digits instead of 4. He didn't see the numbers, but the complexity of the security upgrade spoke volumes. 20 minutes later, she came down in her silk robe, her hair damp. She sat on the sofa, curling her legs under her, looking soft and accessible. This was the woman he had loved for 15 years. But as he handed her the wine glass, he saw the ghost of the man from the photo standing beside her, an invisible third presence in their living room. "So," Daniel said, sitting in the armchair opposite her, maintaining a calculated distance. Tell me about the speakers. Was there anyone new? Anyone interesting? Elena took a sip of wine, her eyes over the rim meeting his. For a second, just a microsecond, he saw a flicker of hesitation, a calculation. Mostly the usual dinosaurs, she said, setting the glass down. There was a panel on bioethics that was decent. But honestly, Daniel, I just want to forget about work for the weekend. Just us. Just us, Daniel repeated. He watched her relax into the cushions, closing her eyes, believing her performance had been successful. She thought she was safe. She thought the walls of their house were thick enough to keep Chicago out. Daniel took a drink of his wine, the liquid bitter on his tongue. He realized then that he wasn't just sad. He was fascinated. He was watching a stranger wearing his wife's face, and he needed to know exactly who this stranger was before he destroyed her. The house at 3:00 a.m. was a tomb of expensive silence. Upstairs, in the master suite, Elena was sleeping the deep, untroubled sleep of the righteous, or the expertly deceitful. Daniel lay beside her for an hour, listening to the rhythm of her breathing, a sound that used to comfort him but now sounded like a countdown. He couldn't stay there. The proximity was suffocating. He slipped out of bed, the plush carpet absorbing his footsteps, and made his way down to his study. This was his sanctuary, a room of drafting tables, blueprints, and the humming stack of servers that managed the terabytes of data required for his landscape architecture firm. Because their lives were so intertwined, Elena's devices backed up to this same central hub. It was a convenience they had set up years ago, a shared digital ecosystem for a shared life. Daniel sat in his ergonomic chair, the mesh cold against his back. He woke the monitor. The blue light washed over his face, harsh and clinical. He had never snooped before. He had always prided himself on respecting her autonomy, believing that trust was the mortar that held their marriage together. But the image of Julian holding her hand had dissolved that mortar, leaving only dry, crumbling bricks. He navigated to the backup directory, users, Elena library, mail archived. His hand hovered over the mouse. This was the Rubicon. Crossing it meant admitting that their marriage was now a crime scene, and he was the forensic investigator. He clicked. He didn't search for hotel or sex. He searched for Julian. The results populated the screen instantly, hundreds of them. Daniel felt a physical blow to his chest. He expected a few recent exchanges regarding the conference. Instead, he saw a thread stretching back 8 months. He opened the oldest one, dated from last November. Subject: The melancholy of winter light. It wasn't a work email. It was a meditation on the season, on how the gray Chicago sky made her feel small and introspective. She wrote about her fear of stagnation, her worry that she had peaked professionally, her desire to write a book one day. Daniel read, his eyes burning. She hadn't mentioned wanting to write a book to him in a decade. He clicked through the months. There were no explicit photos, no sexting, nothing that could be flagged by a corporate HR filter as harassment. It was worse. It was a courtship of the mind. I saw this article on bioethics and thought of your argument last week, Julian wrote in one. You were right. I was looking at the data, but you were looking at the humanity. You always see the people behind the numbers, Elena. It's what makes you brilliant. You make me feel seen, Julian, she had replied. Sometimes I feel like I'm just a function in my own life, a calendar invite, a signature on a check. With you, I remember what it's like to just be. Daniel stopped reading, his vision blurring. A function. That's what he had become to her. He was the landscape architect of her life, maintaining the grounds, keeping the hedges trimmed and the pathways clear, but never invited inside the house of her inner thoughts. He opened a draft from 2 weeks ago, one she evidently hadn't sent but had saved. I'm going to Connecticut this weekend. Back to the routine. He's a good man, Julian. That's the hardest part. He's good, and he's steady, and I feel like I'm suffocating under all that safety. I miss the way you challenge me. I miss the noise of us. Daniel leaned back, the chair groaning softly. He looked at the timestamp. She had written that while sitting on this very sofa, probably while Daniel was cooking dinner, thinking they were having a peaceful evening. The betrayal wasn't that she slept with him. It was that she had given Julian the best parts of herself, her fears, her dreams, her intellectual vibrancy, and left Daniel with the husk. The good man, the steady man, the bore. He closed the window, minimizing the evidence but unable to delete it from his mind. The hallway photo had shown him the intimacy of their bodies. The emails had shown him the intimacy of their souls. He turned off the monitor, plunging the room back into darkness. He sat there for a long time, listening to the hum of the server, the machine that held the digital ghost of his wife's heart. He knew now that he couldn't just confront her with a picture. That was too small. He was fighting a war against a connection that made his 15-year marriage look like a business arrangement. He stood up to go back upstairs. He would lie next to her. He would listen to her breathe. And he would begin to plan how to remind her that steady didn't mean harmless. The dining room was a theater of candlelight and crystal. Daniel had insisted on the dinner party, claiming they owed the Mitchells and the Davises a return invitation. Elena had hesitated, citing post-travel fatigue, but Daniel had been charmingly insistent. We need to get back to normal life, he had said, using the word normal like a weapon. Now, 6 people sat around the mahogany table. The roast was perfect. The wine was a vintage Bordeaux that cost more than Daniel's first car. And the conversation flowed with the easy, affluent rhythm of Connecticut suburbia. Daniel sat at the head of the table, watching his wife. She looked impeccable in a navy sheath dress, playing the part of the hostess with practiced grace. But Daniel noticed the tightness at the corners of her eyes. He noticed that she was on her 3rd glass of wine before the main course had even been cleared. So, Elena, Roger Mitchell began, cutting into his lamb. Roger was a senior partner at a law firm that handled corporate liability, a man who appreciated details. How was the Windy City? Daniel said it was all work and no play. Elena smiled, though her hand tightened slightly on the stem of her glass. It was intense, very focused. The pharmaceutical landscape is changing so fast. I heard the conference lineup was impressive, Daniel interjected smoothly, leaning forward. Didn't you say Julian Thorne was speaking? The air seemed to still around Elena. She blinked once slowly. Yes, I think he was on the schedule. You think? Daniel swirled his wine, his expression one of innocent curiosity. I recall you mentioning him a few years ago. Bright kid. Fresh perspectives, wasn't it? He looked at the other guests. Elena has such an eye for talent. She always knows who the disruptors are. I didn't actually see his talk, Elena lied, taking a quick sip of wine. I was in breakout sessions most of the time. That's a shame, Daniel said, his voice dropping to a sympathetic register that felt cold as ice. Especially since you were feeling so stifled lately. It might have been good to hear something challenging. Elena's eyes snapped to his. Stifled. It wasn't the exact word from the email. She had written suffocating, but it was close enough to graze the nerve. I didn't say I was stifled, she said, her laugh brittle. Just tired. Oh, nonsense, Sarah Davis chimed in. We all feel it. The routine, the same commute, the same house. Sometimes you just want a little chaos, right? Exactly, Daniel said, locking eyes with his wife. Sometimes the safety of a good life feels heavy. Isn't that right, Elle? Sometimes you miss the noise. The color drained from Elena's face. The noise of us. The phrase from her draft email to Julian. Daniel saw the recognition hit her like a physical blow. She set her glass down, a little too hard. Wine sloshed over the rim, staining the white tablecloth like a drop of blood. Daniel, she said, her voice warning, though the guests just thought she was embarrassed by the spill. Here, let me, Daniel said, reaching over with a napkin. He dabbed at the stain, his movements precise and slow. You seem a bit shaky tonight, darling. Still jet-lagged? I guess so, she whispered. It must be the late nights, Daniel continued, turning back to Roger. She told me she was in bed by 10 every night. But you know how these conferences are. The real business happens in the hallways after midnight. He let the word hallways hang in the air. Elena went rigid. She looked at him, searching his face for the bottom of this sudden cruelty. But Daniel wore a mask of perfect, doting concern. Actually, Roger said, oblivious to the subtext, I heard the Hyatt had some security issues that weekend. A colleague of mine said there was a bit of a row on the executive floor. Hope it didn't keep you up, Elena. Daniel smiled. It was a predatory smile, sharp and humorless. Yes, Elena. Did you hear anything? Any disturbances near your suite? Elena looked trapped. She was a deer caught not in headlights, but in the crosshairs of a sniper scope. She picked up her water glass, her hand trembling visibly now. No, she said, her voice faint. I slept through everything. Lucky, Daniel said softly. It's a blessing to be able to sleep so soundly when there's so much going on right outside your door. He raised his glass. To safety, he toasted, looking directly at the man who had stolen his wife's heart. And to the things we keep hidden to protect it. The guests raised their glasses, murmuring agreement, oblivious to the fact that they were witnessing an execution. Elena raised hers, but she didn't drink. She just stared at Daniel, and for the first time he saw fear. Real, unadulterated fear. She knew she didn't know how he knew or how much he knew, but she knew the game had changed. And Daniel, watching her fear, felt a sick, dark satisfaction that terrified him almost as much as it pleased him. The crisis arrived on a Tuesday, not with a bang, but with a warning letter from the FDA regarding a clinical trial phase for the company's flagship drug. By the time Daniel returned home at 7:00 p.m., the atmosphere in the house was vibrating with a frequency he hadn't felt in years. It was the frantic, electrified air of catastrophe. Elena was in the kitchen, but she wasn't cooking. Papers were strewn across the marble island. Printouts of compliance protocols, emails, legal briefs. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, messy bun, and she was pacing a tight circle between the refrigerator and the sink, chewing on her thumbnail. A habit she had quit when she was 25. L? Daniel placed his keys in the bowl, the clatter loud in the tense room. I saw the news on the ticker. Is it the beta blocker trial? Elena stopped pacing, looking at him with wild, unfocused eyes. It's a disaster, Daniel. A complete compliance failure. If the board finds out the timeline discrepancies, we're looking at a stock plummet of 40% by Friday. Daniel loosened his tie, stepping forward. He knew crisis management. He had navigated zoning wars and environmental lawsuits for his firm. Okay, slow down. You need to control the narrative before the market opens. Have you drafted a statement? I can look at the liability clauses with you. He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, an offer of stability in the storm. Elena flinched. It was subtle, a quick tightening of her deltoid muscle, but she pulled away as if his touch burned. No, Daniel, she snapped, turning her back to him to shuffle the papers. You don't understand. This isn't zoning. This is complex bioregulatory law. I can't explain it to you right now. I don't have the time to teach you. The rejection hung in the air, absolute and dismissive. I'm just trying to help, he said quietly. I know. Just let me handle it. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She snatched it up, her expression shifting instantly from annoyance to desperate relief. I have to take this. She walked out of the kitchen, heading for the solarium, the furthest room from where he stood. Daniel didn't move. He stood by the island, listening. The house was large, but the acoustics carried voices if you knew where to stand. He walked softly to the hallway, leaning against the doorframe. Julian, he heard her say. Her voice wasn't the sharp, professional tone she used with her team. It was breathless. Did you see the addendum? I know. I'm terrified. Tell me we can fix this. Daniel closed his eyes. He listened to the silence that followed, imagining Julian on the other end. Calm, brilliant, speaking the language that Elena claimed Daniel couldn't understand. Okay, Elena said after a minute, her voice dropping, softening into a sigh. Okay, you're right. We pivot to the safety data. God. I don't know what I'd do without you right now. I feel like I can't breathe here. Here, in this house with him. Daniel walked back to the kitchen. He picked up the bottle of wine she had opened and poured the rest of it into the sink. The liquid swirled down the drain, red and dark. He wasn't angry anymore. Anger implied passion, and passion implied hope. What he felt was the cold, clarifying numbness of an autopsy. She didn't just want Julian's body, she needed his mind. Daniel had been demoted to a roommate who paid the mortgage. The next morning, Daniel canceled his site visits. He drove into the city, but not to his office. The law firm of Sterling and Vance, no relation, was located on the 40th floor of a glass tower in Midtown. The conference room smelled of lemon polish and expensive leather. Arthur Sterling was a man who didn't believe in mediation. He believed in demolition. I'm not filing yet, Daniel said, sitting across from the silver-haired attorney. He placed a folder on the table. It contained a printout of the hallway photo and a log of the email metadata he had extracted. I want a strategic assessment. Sterling opened the folder, glancing at the photo without blinking. He had seen worse. Infidelity is common, Daniel. In Connecticut, it's practically a hobby. What is your objective? Do you want to reconcile, or do you want to win? She thinks I'm irrelevant, Daniel said, his voice devoid of emotion. She thinks I'm the safe, boring backdrop to her brilliant life. I don't want to just divorce her, Arthur. I want to know what the blast radius looks like if I pull the pin. Sterling leaned back, tenting his fingers. If you can prove the affair affected her professional judgment, given that he's a competitor and they are discussing proprietary data, you impact her career, her standing, and her assets. You don't just end the marriage, you dismantle the pedestal she's standing on. Daniel looked out the window at the skyline. He thought of Elena's relieved sigh on the phone. I don't know what I'd do without you. Draft the analysis, Daniel said, standing up. I want to be ready. He walked out of the office. He had the weapon now. He just needed the right stage to use it. The annual Trustees' Gala was held in the Great Hall of the City Museum, a cavernous space of marble and limestone that echoed with the polite murmur of 300 wealthy donors. The air smelled of expensive floristry, Casablanca lilies and cold champagne. Daniel wore his tuxedo like armor, the fabric stiff and immaculate. Beside him, Elena shimmered in a silver gown that clung to her frame, her smile fixed and radiant, though Daniel could feel the tremor in her arm where it rested in the crook of his elbow. She was terrified. She had been terrified since the dinner party, walking on eggshells in her own home, sensing a predator in the dark, but unable to see its eyes. Relax, Elle, Daniel murmured, patting her hand. You look beautiful. No one knows the stock dropped 2 points today. I'm not worried about the stock, she whispered, her eyes darting around the room. I have a headache. We'll make the rounds. An hour, then we go. He guided her through the crowd, accepting handshakes and hollow compliments. He was the perfect husband, the supportive partner. He steered her past the mayor, past the board members, moving with a deliberate, shark-like purpose. He was hunting. And then he saw him. Julian Thorne was standing near the erratic sculpture in the center of the room, holding a flute of champagne. He looked exactly as he did in the high-resolution photos on the company website. But seeing him in 3 dimensions was a visceral shock. He was younger than Daniel, yes, but he possessed an intensity, a vibrant energy that Daniel's stoicism lacked. He was talking to a donor, using his hands to emphasize a point, the same hands that had cradled Elena's face. Daniel felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp. He adjusted his cufflink. Oh, look, Daniel said, his voice bright. There's that speaker you missed. Julian Thorne. Elena stopped, dead. Her fingers dug into Daniel's bicep. Daniel, no. Let's go get a drink at the other bar. Nonsense. We should say hello. Professional courtesy. He didn't give her a choice. He walked her forward, his physical strength overruling her reluctance. As they approached, Julian turned. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Elena, a flash of recognition and longing that he quickly suppressed behind a professional mask. Then he looked at Daniel, and the mask tightened. Mr. Thorne, Daniel said, extending his hand. Daniel Vance. We met a few years ago, and you know my wife, Elena. Julian took the hand. His grip was firm, but his palm was damp. Of course. Good to see you, Daniel. Elena, you look stunning tonight. Thank you, Julian, Elena said. Her voice was thin, breathless. She wouldn't look him in the eye. We were just talking about your conference in Chicago, Daniel said, stepping into the small triangle of space between them, closing the circle. Elena said she missed your talk, which is a pity. She's usually very attentive to fresh perspectives. Julian shifted his weight. It was a standard presentation. Nothing groundbreaking. I doubt that, Daniel said, smiling. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Elena has been so different since she came back. Inspired, really. It's amazing what a few late nights in a city like that can do for the soul. The silence that followed was heavy, louder than the string quartet playing in the corner. Elena was staring at the floor. Julian was staring at Daniel, his brow furrowing as he sensed the trap. "Is everything all right, Daniel?" Julian asked, his tone cautious. "Everything is perfect," Daniel replied softly. He leaned in closer, invading their personal space, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that only the two of them could hear. "Actually, Julian, I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For taking care of her," Daniel said, his eyes locking onto Elena's terrified face. "The hotel called me about the hallway. They sent me the footage from the 14th floor." The color drained from Julian's face instantly, leaving him as pale as the marble walls. Elena made a small, choked sound, her hand flying to her mouth. 2:14 a.m., Daniel recited, the numbers cutting through the air like a scalpel. "You have a very tender way of holding her hand, Julian. It was quite moving to watch. Cinematic, almost." "Daniel," Elena gasped, tears springing to her eyes. "Please." "Don't worry," Daniel said, straightening up and brushing a piece of invisible lint from his lapel. "I paid for the damage to the sconce. Consider it a donation to the cause." He looked at the two of them, the lovers, the intellectuals, the soulmates, now standing paralyzed in the ruin he had made of their secret. They looked small. They looked guilty. "I'm going to get the car," Daniel said pleasantly. "Take your time saying goodbye. I imagine you have a lot to talk about." He turned and walked away, the sound of his dress shoes clicking rhythmically on the stone floor, leaving them standing amidst the wreckage of their privacy in the middle of a room full of people. The drive back to Connecticut was a masterclass in silence. It wasn't the comfortable silence of their early years, nor the resentful silence of the last week. It was the absolute, vacuum-sealed silence of an ending. The only sound was the hum of the tires on the asphalt and the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers clearing a light mist that had settled over the highway. When they pulled into the driveway, the house loomed in the darkness, a sprawling architectural triumph of stone and glass. For the first time, Daniel saw it not as an achievement, but as a container. A beautiful, expensive box where two strangers had lived in parallel lines, never intersecting. They walked into the kitchen. The light from the refrigerator was harsh as Elena reached for a bottle of water. She didn't pour a glass. She just held the cold plastic against her forehead, her eyes closed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The words were small, barely disturbing the air. Daniel stood on the other side of the island, unbuttoning his tuxedo jacket. He felt exhausted, a bone-deep weariness that had nothing to do with the hour. For the affair? Or for getting caught? Elena lowered the bottle and looked at him. Her mascara was smudged slightly beneath one eye, a crack in her perfect veneer. "I'm sorry that I didn't tell you I was lonely before I let someone else fill the space." It was the most honest thing she had said in years. "I saw the emails, Elena," Daniel said, his voice devoid of the cruelty he had wielded at the gala. The rage had burned itself out, leaving only ash. "I read what you wrote to him. You gave him your mind. You gave him the version of yourself that you stopped showing me a decade ago." "Because you stopped looking," she countered, not with malice, but with a sad resignation. We became a corporation, Daniel. Vance Inc. We managed the assets. We attended the functions. We optimized our schedules. But when was the last time you asked me what I was afraid of? When was the last time we touched without it being a scheduled event? Daniel looked down at his hands. He wanted to argue, to list the vacations he planned, the gifts he bought, the stability he provided. But the image of the hallway footage flashed in his mind, Julian's thumb tracing the back of her hand. That simple, unpurchasable tenderness. I thought I was building a life for us, Daniel said. I thought safety was the goal. Safety is static, Elena said. I was dying in the safety, Daniel. Julian, he just saw that I was still alive. She took off her diamond earrings, placing them on the granite counter with a soft click. It sounded like a gavel coming down. So, Daniel said, leaning against the counter. Where do we go from here? Do we hire Sterling? Do we fight over the assets? I don't want to fight, she said, shaking her head. I don't have the energy to fight you. I can't stay in this house anymore. I can't sleep in that bed knowing you've seen me with him. And I can't pretend that we can fix this just because we're afraid of the scandal. Daniel looked around the kitchen, the Viking range, the custom cabinetry, the life he had designed to be perfect. It was all still there, impeccable and cold. No, he agreed softly. We can't fix it. The footage, it didn't break us, Elle. It just showed us that we were already broken. He walked over to the wine rack, not to drink, but to occupy his hands. You should go to the city tonight. Stay at the pied-à-terre. I'll stay here. We can talk to the lawyers on Monday. Elena nodded. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She knew that some things were beyond the geography of forgiveness. She turned to leave, her silver dress rustling like dry leaves. Daniel? She paused at the doorway. Yeah? He didn't come into the room that night, she said. In Chicago. We stood in the hallway. He held my hand and we wanted to. God, we both wanted to. But I went into the room alone. That's why the footage ends there. Daniel looked at her. It should have mattered, that technicality of fidelity, but he realized with a heavy heart that it didn't change a thing. The betrayal wasn't the sex. It was the fact that she had wished she was with him. It doesn't matter, Elena, Daniel said, turning off the kitchen light, plunging them both into the shadows. You had already left. She stood there for a moment longer, a silhouette in the dark, and then she was gone. Daniel listened to the front door click shut. The sound final and absolute. He stood alone in the dark house, the silence finally returning. But this time he didn't try to fill it. He just let it be.